and welcome to this videocast and podcast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, the people behind this global conspiracy for mass human control are nothing if not predictable if you know what you're looking at. Way back in the 90s, I was warning about the agenda for human microchipping. And I said at that time that the then voluntary microchipping of dogs, domestic animals, was a case of the totalitarian tiptoe. First, it would be voluntary. Oh, there's no compulsion, don't worry about it. No, it's all voluntary. And then eventually they would make microchipping of dogs and other animals compulsory. And this is the process that's also being used to impose the microchipping of human beings, which I'll come to in a second. But I mention this today because of this story running in the newspapers this week. Dog microchipping law will see owners fined hundreds as 1 million pets are still not registered. You see, it's not voluntary anymore, just as it was never going to be. It's the totalitarian tiptoe. Do it bit by bit and then they might not notice. An estimated 1.4 million of the UK's dogs are yet to be registered as the microchipping deadline looms. Thousands of dog owners are set to face fines of several £100s as more than 1 million dogs have still not been microchipped before the law is imposed to register them. 8 million dogs apparently have now been microchipped. Oh, it's the law, you got a microchip. All dogs must be microchipped under a new legal requirement which sees the creation of the National Canine Database, Human Database. The new measures aim to create a central database listing every dog, brackets human, making every pet owner responsible for the registration. It is hoped this will reduce the number of dogs being dumped as well as the lucrative black market trade in animals. Now, every single law has at least two meanings. One is the meaning they tell you about so that you will accept it. Oh, no, it's good because these are all the benefits of it. And then there's another part of the law, the real reason for the law, which they don't tell you about, which is the totalitarian tiptoe here to human microchipping. It says the sterile microchip is roughly the size of a grain of rice and is implanted just under your dog's skin between its shoulder blades. Each chip contains a unique identification number that is listed on a national database which holds all the owner's contact details such as their address and phone number, brackets humans. Lee Paris, campaigns manager at the charity The Dogs Trust. See, this is the thing. I have this phrase, my dot is the only dot. People look at their personal dot, their personal focus, and that's all they can see. They can't connect their dot to other dots to see the picture. And the picture here is not what this guy and people like him believe, that this is what microchipping of dogs is all about. It's actually about moving on step by step to the microchipping of humans. Anyway, he says, having a dog microchipped should give owners peace of mind. Have your child microchipped, it will give you peace of mind. You'll be hearing that one. Because all dogs have the capacity to escape no matter how responsible the owner is. This will make it much easier to reunite worried owners with their pets. Knock it forward. This would help the state reunite with fugitives or people challenging the state or trying to get away from the state for what are they're doing and saying about the state. Microchips have been a legal requirement in Northern Ireland since 2012. Now England, Scotland and Wales are set to follow suit. Nearly 120,000 dogs are dumped or lost each year, and less than half of those are reunited with their owners. And this story in a national newspaper then goes on to give more reasons why microchipping your dog is a good thing. How long before they're telling us that microchipping humans and your children is a good thing? So what we're looking at is a process, the tiptoe process, which is mirroring that of dogs and animals, to introduce microchipping of humans voluntarily. It's already started, my goodness. And then to make it impossible virtually to function unless you're microchipped. I mean, take the example of the credit card. It's more and more difficult to function without a credit card, even if you don't want one. And that's the process of microchipping. To, first of all, it's voluntary, then making it almost impossible to function without one in terms of interacting with society. And then, like this, to make them compulsory. And we're seeing the most obvious sequence where people are being, pulled in on the fishing line without realizing that that's what's happening. So, first of all, you get people addicted to technology which they hold, holdables, shall we call them. And of course, that part is massively already achieved. Oh yeah. So what you say? What you say? What? Can't take their eyes off the frickin' things. It's an addiction to holdables. Stage 1. Stage 2, wearables. All got names, these stages. Wearables. This is your Google Glass. This is your Bluetooth on your ear. This is your smartwatch. Now we've moved from here to on the skin, on the body. Ooh, getting closer now. And the next stage, they're already talking about it. It's already happening. Is what they call implantables. Microchips and other transhumanist technology. And the idea is that once you get this technology inside you, pull them in. Yeah. Have you seen the latest smartphone? Oh, yeah, Apple's got another one out. Oh, you better queue in the middle of the night to get the first one. Once you have this technology inside you, you will be technologically connected to sources of thought, perception. That will mean that the human part of you is no more. Technology will be literally thinking for you. And I set all this out in my new book, Phantom Self, and put it in the context of the modern world and how it's happening before our eyes. And so when you look at the scale of surveillance that's happening now to protect us from terrorism, honest, it's extraordinary. Little list. First of all, not just getting your fingerprints, but getting them from 20 feet or more away. through these technologies today. Mobile backscatter vans, where the authorities going around in unmarked vans, basically X-raying your car, your vehicle, anything they want to, just like when you're going through airports. And these are now being introduced. Never mind if you're in the way when they're X-raying something. Well, bad luck, mate. Better get down the hospital fast. Not that they'll help you. Unmanned drones. Now we're having drones being introduced. My goodness me, the scale that is being talked about will blow people away. They're even hijacking the sky now. And these are unmanned drones, some of them armed, that will be flying around with cameras, keeping surveillance on everybody. Protect us from terrorism. Honest. Then we've got biometrics, biometric databases where they keep surveillance on people based on their unique physical and behavioral traits. Biometrics comes from two Greek words meaning, in effect, measuring life. Automated license plate readers, cameras all over the place. So when your car goes past, they take your number plate, they know where you are. Face reading software. When you're not in a car, they know where you are. Data mining, all these massive taking of personal data. Street lights spying on us. Yes, they call them IntelliStreets. These are street lamps which will also project Wi-Fi everywhere. It's the idea anyway. That will have microphones listening to conversations in the street. Then there's, of course, internet activity, constantly under surveillance there. In terms of people that are not on their radar, they can go and find it if they choose to later, and people on their radar actually in real time, seeing what they're doing on the internet. Pre-crime surveillance cameras. These are cameras that are making judgments on whether you're likely to commit a crime or not. And the idea is that you get arrested early, before you do it, even though you weren't going to do it. And we have now we have these cameras and biometrics and all these forms of surveillance and security in schools getting more and more extreme. And all that is getting children and young people used to constant total surveillance so that it becomes their norm. So when they go out into an adult world, by which time it will be big time further on than we are now in terms of surveillance, these technologies and new ones come in all the time, that they won't, this is the idea, they won't react against it, they won't challenge it, they won't question it, because they've been brought up surrounded by it in the schools, thus it's their norm. And this is what's happening. We shouldn't forget that. You know, I was born in 1952, before all this really in-your-face stuff started. So I'm able to have a perspective from seeing what was to seeing what is. Young people coming into the world now, this is their norm. And it's fantastic that so many young people are actually seeing it and challenging it despite that. And we are told that all of this constant 24/7 surveillance with now telescreens, Orwell's telescreens, now called smart TVs, that can film you in your own home, with smart phones that can keep surveillance on you wherever you go. And by the way, the smart TVs are only Mark 1 of this. Wait till the next lot and the next lot and the next lot come out with more and more surveillance capability in your own home. So we're told all of this is to protect us from terrorism. And that's one of the benefits of this mass of state-sponsored, state-organized, state-engineered terrorism. It's to provide an excuse, other reasons too, that benefit this agenda for global control. But one is they can then justify more and more of this nonsense that people say, oh, well, I know I don't like it, but we've got to be protected from the terrorists. Well, let's put this in perspective. It's about time. This is an article from the New Yorker. In 2014, terrorist attacks caused just 37 deaths in Western countries, 0.11% of the global tally. Yes, the numbers go up and they go down year by year, but there's a figure that puts in perspective the kind of numbers and the area of numbers we're talking about. 37 died from terrorist attacks in Western countries in 2014, and then take into account that much of the terrorism is state created as a create the problem to offer the solution scenario. During the 15 years from 2000 to 2014, the vast majority of these deaths resulted from terrorism in the West, resulted from 4 incidents: the 9/11 attacks in the United States, the 2004 train bombings in Madrid, the transit bombings in London in 2005, and the 2011 gun massacre and bombing in Norway. Every single one of those has massive questions. I mean, 9/11, don't start me. Massive questions and blatant discrepancies, often of a blatant variety in terms of the official story of what is supposed to have happened there. But let's just contrast that. 2014, 37 people in Western countries died from terrorist attacks. Figures from the European Society for Cardiology for cardiovascular disease in Europe in the same year, 2014. Deaths from various forms of cardiovascular disease in Europe alone, never mind the United States and other Western countries, 1.3 million compared with 37. And there was another 700,000 died from cardiovascular disease in the United States as well. Cancer deaths in America alone, never mind the other Western countries in Europe, more than 500,000 a year. Deaths on American roads in 2014, more than 32,000, and that's without all the other countries in the West. Deaths from alcohol in the United States alone every year, 88,000. Number of deaths in 2014 in Western countries from terrorism, including state-sponsored terrorism, 37. Anti-terrorism spending 50,000 times more than any other cause of death. The US spends more than $500 million per victim on anti-terrorism efforts. However, cancer research spending is only $10,000 per victim. Evolutionary psychology, this article says, may offer an explanation for this irrational threat amplification. You don't need all that stuff. It's because the conspiracy wants all the spending to protect us from terrorism, because it's not protecting us from terrorism, it's building the global surveillance control system state. And it wants people to die once they can't serve the system anymore, when they get older. And thus, as one insider says, they might as well die of cancer as something else. Thus, the fantastic discrepancy on spending between protecting from terrorism and protecting from cancer. The article goes on to the least likely means of death mentioned here, terrorism. The federal government devotes about $150 billion annually. On the other hand, to combat the most likely cause of death, heart disease, the government contributes only $2 billion. $2 billion as opposed to $150 billion. And just $300 million is devoted to research on the third most likely cause of death, strokes. And it concludes, so looking at it another way, we spend $500 million for every death from terrorism and only $2,000 for every death resulting from strokes. That means we spend 250,000 times more per death on terrorism. And then we are told that we must fight terrorism as well as keep people under total surveillance to protect them from terrorism. We must fight terrorism because we must stop people being killed. Really. Deaths from fighting terrorism compared with terrorism itself. In 2014, terrorist attacks caused just 37 deaths in Western countries, 0.11% of the global tally. Relative to this year, that was relatively peaceful, but it's a figure that can be used to compare the vast differences that I'm highlighting here. The Washington, D.C.-based Physicians for Social Responsibility released a landmark study concluding that the death toll from 10 years of the war on terror since the 9/11 attacks is at least 1.3 million and could be as high as 2 million. According to other figures, total deaths from Western interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan since the 1990s, from direct killings and the longer-term impact of war-imposed deprivation, are likely to constitute around 4 million people, and could be as high as 6 to 8 million people when accounting for higher avoidable death estimates in Afghanistan. Such figures could well be too high, it says, but we'll never know for sure. Why not? Because US and UK armed forces, as a matter of policy, refuse to keep track of the civilian death toll of military operations. They are an irrelevant inconvenience. Due to the severe lack of data in Iraq, almost complete non-existence of records in Afghanistan, and the indifference of Western governments to civilian deaths, it is literally impossible to determine the true extent of loss of life. So, even on guesstimates, the number of people who have been killed in the war and by the war against terrorism is in the millions and millions and millions. Whereas a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that, even tinier if you take away state-sponsored terrorism, has killed people through terrorism itself. Now, of course, if one person gets killed by terrorism, it's terrible. But putting it all in perspective, the idea that this emerging, so fast emerging, surveillance global state is to protect people from terrorism is ludicrous. It is there to build the control system, the total control system, down to the fine detail of people's lives. And of course, the migrant crisis, opening the doors like Chancellor Merkel in Germany, just opening the doors, no matter what, and no matter who, has opened many things, but it's certainly opened, as I pointed out at the time when it started, it's opened the opportunity to say, well, we've got all these people now, all these Muslims coming into Europe, and among them are terrorists and jihadists. So we have to have more surveillance, more control to protect you from them. It's so blatant when you connect the dots. So this week, here's a headline: staggering number of European jihadists. EU's own agency admits terrorists are exploiting migrant crisis as illegal border crossings hit record 1.82 million. I remember doing an interview just as this migrant crisis started and pointing out that this was coming. Oh, there's all these jihadists now in Europe because of this, and we've got to do this and that and the other to protect you from them. And just another excuse to put the agenda forward and into even greater overdrive. Mass migration is allowing terrorists to sneak into the EU, its own border agency admitted last night, wants you to believe. In a devastating report, it said the Paris attacks proved jihadists were exploiting the refugee crisis. The Frontex agency logged a record 1.82 million illegal crossings into the EU last year, 6 times more than in 2014. But it said it had no idea how many illegal immigrants there were, and in any case had no way of tracing their movements inside the EU. Officials also warned a staggering number of European citizens had become jihadists and were taking advantage of lax border controls. Problem, reaction, solution. And with the whole transhumanist agenda, which is coming in all the time via holdables, wearables, implantables, the scale of human control down to thought and emotion even is planned eventually to be total. And we look at people in the system, vast numbers of people in the system, in uniforms and caps of law enforcement, etc., security, in the dark suit, bureaucratic web in every country. And the vast majority of them are introducing and enforcing these laws, these surveillance technologies, and the daily destruction of more and more of the most basic freedoms, while having no idea whatsoever of the consequences and the agenda that they are creating and serving. There, again, classic examples of my dot is the only dot. And yet, every day, they are contributing to not only their own enslavement and the enslavement of people here today, adults today, but this is not where it's meant to end. This is where it is now. And if people think it's bad now, what's it going to be like for their children and grandchildren by the time they're adults? And it's so important that young people today who are old enough to be able to have a voice focus on this because it's their world we're talking about. I mean, it's our world already with all this stuff already going on and will continue to go on among or during the lives of older people. But young people, people in the schools, in the colleges and universities and elsewhere, this is your world we are seeing being constructed. If you don't focus on it now, then when are you going to do it? Further down the line, when there's more surveillance, more control, and challenging it gets more and more difficult? That's the same for everybody. When are we going to draw the line and then start running the line back? There's billions of people in the world. The number of people who are driving this in full knowledge that they're driving it and where they want it to go is tiny, tiny compared with that. So anyone who gets access to this information and then thinks the way to respond is to watch something by Simon Cowell, some game show or whatever, or whatever diversion, and not actually focus on what matters, which is their own freedom disappearing by the day, then they'll just have to live with what's coming if nothing is done. And we are now looking at increasing efforts at censorship. You know, I've come across it with Facebook and others, to stop information alerting people to what the plan is, not just in terms of surveillance, but across the great spectrum of this transformation of society into a post-human state. And thus, this is not going to just, like I say, stop here, this censorship, here and no further. It's going to go on. They're going to try to eventually silence everybody. I mean, what have we come to when, you know, the Green Party, that's supposed to be this liberal political party about freedom, that wants to silence and have silenced in the media people challenging the lie of human-caused global warming. And so what we're looking at now are the people you would expect to be defending freedom who are actually calling for freedom to be deleted. Look at what's happening in colleges and universities in the West, where once upon a time, when I was a kid, students went on marches demanding freedom of speech. Now they go out protesting against freedom of speech. Oh, no, I want a safe space. Don't want to be upset. We had a situation of last week where students at a college in America said they were literally traumatized by seeing that someone had written Trump 2016 in chalk on the pavement. I mean, we're going through a genetic mutation where people are born without backbones. And while all this is going on, their freedoms are being taken away all the time. We're taking your freedoms away, but we're going to give you a safe space. You won't be upset anymore because now we've got control of your mind and your emotions. We can stop you being upset about anything or thinking about anything worth thinking about. The scale of this human control, I mean, you just get into the transhumanist side of this and you'll see it's eventually, indeed it's already happening, about control of thought and control of emotion. So there's no human left. And here we are here we are, facing all this. And every day I watched the explosion of divide and rule, playing white people off against black people, Muslims off against Christians, Hindus and Jews, and all these labels for people. They're all played off against each other. It's the Muslims, it's the so-and-so, it's the so-and-so. And yet, does anyone think that only white people are going to be microchipped? Or only Muslims, or only Hindus? It's everybody. We're all in this together, and the divide and rule is to stop us coming together to, in unity, say enough. Well, unless we do, and fast, there's going to be a time of colossal mass regret that we didn't do so. This is not something that's sometime never over the rainbow. This is happening now, and it's happening in more extreme terms all the time. We better address it. We better face it together while we still can.